On 30 June 1960, Congo became an independent state under the rule of President Kasavubu and Prime Minister Lumumba. When the army didn't receive the same privileges as most civil servants, a revolt started, which rapidly spread throughout the country. Belgian technicians and advisors fled in panic. Belgian paratroops stationed at bases in Kamina and Kitona intervened. In Katanga, its President Tshomba declared the province independent as from 11 July. When the threat of intervention from eastern countries was considered to be overwhelming, the Security Council decided, on the initiative of Dag Hammarskjöld, to send UN troops. UN headquarters in Leopoldville, commonly called Confusion Center. The first UN troops arrived on 15 June. The first mission was to relieve Belgian troops and to maintain law and order. The operation came to last for 4 years. ONUC civilian representative Sture Linnaer, with Swedish liaison officer Arne Ugla. Dag Hammarskjöld visited the Congo several times. He perished in a much-questioned air crash outside Undola, on his way to negotiate with Katanga's President Tshomba. The Swedish battalion was flown into Katanga in August 1960, headed by Mr. Hammarskjöld. Several long-range patrols were carried out in border areas against the revolting Baluba tribe. Negotiation with the Katangese gendarmerie, led by white mercenary troops. The train escorts from November to February 1961, ordered by UN headquarters to maintain traffic between Katanga and Congo, often resulted in bloody clashes with Baluba tribesmen. Radio communication was maintained by hand-driven Morse signal equipment. Several Swedish battalions were trained in riot exercise, but it never came to any practical use. Riots and demonstrations were directed against the UN, and some Swedes were hit by stones and attacked by machetes. President Tshomba arrives, together with his much-feared Minister of Interior, Monungo. Parades took place regularly. Among others, Belgian officers participated. They were removed by the UN, but replaced with mercenaries by the Katangese government. Since August 1961, a large refugee camp with approximately 40,000 people had grown up around the Swedish camp, and it remained until July 1962. These pictures show one of many search operations for hidden weapons, which had to be removed from the camp. Dogs were a valuable asset and earned respect among the Congolese. When the refugee camp started in August-September 1961, every food distribution was an adventure, and the Swedish soldiers were sometimes compelled to use force in order to keep starving refugees back. In this hard and strenuous work that the Swedes were ordered to execute, they were labelled in the world press as racists. In fact, the Swedes felt compassion for the Congolese. By building steel enclosures in places of food distribution, the situation thus rapidly came under control. A helicopter reconnaissance patrol leaves the Swedish camp and the refugee camp to search for Katangi's forces, which kept the camp under intensive fire during the September fighting. An anti-tank squad, equipped with the recoilless gun Carl Gustaf, deployed for the defence of the refugee camp. Brigade Commander Jonas Verne in conversation with the Irish Battalion Commander. During the December fighting, several diversionary attacks were carried out against the Katangi's forces, who were ranged at the so-called tunnel and along the railroad. The purpose was to impede the Katangis from firing at the camp and to disturb their build-up. Defeated Katangi's vehicles are being searched. Note how each soldier is carrying his hand grenade in the webbing. These are some suspected snipers and other captives. Belgian rifles, captured from the Katangese forces, were a popular booty and were then used instead of the Swedish submachine gun. In Elizabethville, the Katangese forces frequently counterattacked with armoured vehicles. During the night of 15-16 December, the battalion received orders to attack the gendarme headquarters at Camp Massart. The mortar assault fire was intensive. Due to heavy rains, the Swedish soldiers had to swim or ferry across the rivulet, which constituted the attack position. The attack resulted in several casualties. During the final attack, intensive mortar support was given before the battalion was able to take Camp Massart. Under the hot African sun, a Swedish so-called flying barrel is being loaded with automatic gun ammunition, as well as light and heavy rockets. After the September fighting, when Katanga had absolute air supremacy, Swedish fighter and recce aircraft J-29 were brought over after a UN request. The F-22 unit participated in the Congo operation from October 1961 to August 1963. The close-range radar was of great use. F-22 and its flying barrels gave valuable support to the UN units. Here a flight squat attacks Katangese mortar positions and forces heading for Elizabethville. When F-22 arrived at the base, they were well protected by anti-aircraft units and ground forces. Here we see the size of the huge base, approximately 20 kilometers across, with headquarters company, base headquarters and messes. As the base was completely isolated, all fuel had to be transported in petrol barrels by air. The transport aircraft that were used, the Curtiss C-46 Command. One important mission was to receive the Beluga refugees from Elizabethville. They were transported by train to the base, escorted by UN troops. Over 50,000 Belubas passed a transit camp at the Kamina base. awaiting air transport to their various home locations in the Kasai province. In September 1962, one C-47 aircraft with 10 Swedes on board was shot down north of the Kamina base. After having been hit by ground automatic fire and thus made unmanoeuvrable, the pilot had to glide approximately 12 kilometers before belly landing. When the crew rushed out of the plane, they were shot at by Congolese soldiers and balubas, which caused 2 casualties. Well aware of the danger, the 3 men chose to hide in a tree in the forest. When the rescue helicopter arrived the next day, 3 men emerged and were flown to the base. The 5 remaining were arrested by the Congolese soldiers and brought to their battalion commander 50 kilometers north, where they were released and allowed to return to Kamina, a trip which took several days. The coffins with the 2 fallen UN soldiers were received with military honours at the base. During the fighting in December to January 1963, the major bridges were blown up by Katangi's mercenaries. One of these was the Bakuma Bridge. To reopen road and railway connections between the Congo and Katanga was an important task. 112 meters of the road bridge were destroyed. The supports were blown up and the main part of the girder bridge was lying on the riverbed. Since no replacement material was available, scattered parts from the destroyed bridge had to be collected from the river and transported to Kamina for repairs. A total distance of 300 kilometers. After outstanding work by the Swedish engineer soldiers, the bridge was officially handed over to Prime Minister Adula in September 1963, who expressed his recognition of the UN achievement by stating, "The people of the Congo will remember this contribution and sacrifice of the Swedish UN soldiers." In January 1964, the Big Simba Revolution started, during which approximately 1 million Congolese lost their lives. The UN started several heli-borne rescue operations. An Otter reconnaissance plane sees SOS signs from the Makungika station. The aircraft returns to Kikwit, collecting the entire rescue team. Unfortunately, too late. On arrival, the station is burning, and several missionaries are already dead. On 30 December 1962, the Swedish battalion was ordered to occupy the town of Kaminaville with the direct support of Swedish J-29 fighters. The battalion advanced through the town and captured the Katangese military camp. A soldier was ordered to climb the flagpole, to remove the Katangese flag and replace it with the UN flag. During the last few months, the Swedish battalion was transferred to Luleåborg. The parade for President Kasavubu, with Congolese military police, cadet school, special units, the Nigerian UN Police Company, and the Swedish battalion with its M113 and Swedish APC. The medal presentation by the UN Force Commander, General Ironsea, carrying a stuffed crocodile command stick. When the F-22 jets finished their term in 1963, some of the flying barrels returned to Sweden, and the remaining ones were blown up at the Kamina base. After 4 turbulent and adventurous years in this huge country, 6 times the size of Sweden, the UN had finally and successfully reintegrated Katanga with Congo Zaire. The last Swedish contingent returned to Sweden in April 1964.